Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Branigan Communications podcast. On today's show, Grace Gregg, Assistant Account Executive, sits down with Emma Wallow, a Senior Account Executive, and the man himself, Tom Branigan, CEO of Branigan Communications. How many times can somebody say Branigan in one sentence? On today's show, we discuss overcoming self-limiting fears in the workplace and how a lot of these things that can hold us back in our professional development are really in our own heads and not at all the way other people see us. Also discussed were Enneagram personality tests, a big topic of conversation in the Branigan Communications office. And then just a discussion of culture and how important culture is to any workplace, and especially here at Branigan, where it's something we try to cultivate and develop and improve upon all the time. So I'm going to throw it over to Grace. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Branigan podcast. I am Grace Gregg and I'm your host this week. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Tom Branigan and Emma Wallow on their recent presentation, which was on wellness, specifically the thought process behind fear and how to face it. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So I do have some questions for you too, but before we get started, I just wanted to clarify. I would love for this to be an open conversation, so feel free to share as much or as little as you would like.
Sounds good.
So my first question is, can you start off by explaining how you thought of this presentation topic?
Sure. So I think for our listeners to have a little bit more background, every other week we are paired up with a member of the Branigan team and we present on various topics that resonate with us and what we think will resonate with the team, both professionally and personally. And so when Tom and I were paired together, something that was just really on my mind that I wanted to talk about was the idea of, fear and anxiety and how that can inhibit us both in life and work. And something that at Branigan we've spent, the last year kind of focusing on a little bit is the idea of personality tests, going from, Myers-Briggs to the Enneagram test. And we took that as a team last summer. And when we got our results back, we found out that quite a few members of our team were categorized as a 6, which is a loyalist, myself included. And one of the first things that is discussed in the report that you receive after you take this test as a 6 is the idea that this personality type is just a little bit more prone to anxiety, self-doubt, and worry. And just seeing that laid out in this report that really provided a lot of detail into how that can affect you as a person really got me thinking about, how that mentality impacts you in your success and ways that you can combat that and really work through that in your day-to-day life. So that's kind of how we started to put the thought behind this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
We thought about when we start the session with the team, it's a little awkward to lead with, let's talk about fear, because we didn't want to put people off. Mm-hmm. So we came up with this device and we led our session, or we led the meeting with, raise your hand if you've ever told a lie, and invariably everybody raised their hand. And then we segued into some of the most dangerous lies that we tell, are lies we tell ourselves. I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough experience, and that we self-limit, we limit ourselves by these lies we tell us, and we impact the extent to which that we can be successful. And then the whole room, I think, kind of perked up. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it made people more open to talking about this. And what struck me emotionally as we went through the presentation that Emma delivered just beautifully is everybody opened up and talked about fears. And some of our content centered on coping mechanisms and how to get over, when we do this, when we put these limits on ourselves, how do we cope, and what are some strategies we can use. And I was really struck by how open our team became, and in sharing all of that, I thought it brought us closer together because we have a lot of the same as shared issues.
Mm-hmm. So from that conversation, I thought that was super cool. It was very powerful. How do you think that encompasses the culture that you've built here at Branigan?
Well, I like to think that we have a culture, and you've heard me say this before. I don't think there's any illusion that we're all best friends and we all hang out on the weekend and all that. But there is a sense that we genuinely care about each other and consider it a blessing to be able to work together. And there is a sense that people have your back here, and that people really care past what have you churned out today, what have you written today, or what idea did you come up with today. Life has to be more than that. So I think you two are ultimate arbiters of that as people who work here. But I like to think that we foster that kind of sense of, hey, we're all in this together, and let's be practical and do good work and do great work and all that. But at the same time, we're all people, and we all suffer from the human condition and have insecurities and things that we get excited about, and sharing our feelings with each other is a really important part of it. I hope that we fostered that here.
As someone who's been at the company for almost 3 years now, I've grown with the company, and I've seen you can be very open, you can be very honest, and that's something that I really appreciate here, because I think that ability helps us all do a better job. We're able to, communicate how we're feeling, where we're at, and then move from there, whether it's positive or negative, and just kind of work as a team to get toward the shared goals of the company.
And that really means a lot to hear. I think it's easy. Every company, or most companies, say just be yourself. But you have to create an environment where people feel like they can be themselves. And if Emma comes to work one day and she's having a bad day, she's entitled to have a bad day, and nobody's keeping score. Or if I come to work and I'm stressed out, this isn't about keeping score. It's about come to work and do the best job you can and be there for each other.
I also feel like part of the reason why there is fear in the workplace is because a lot of these things aren't talked about, right? And so the fact that by having that open conversation, that at least helped me so much with things that are in my head. So that was really
Great
cool.
point.
I think we all forget, and that was something that really was kind of the driving force behind me wanting to present on this and really expand on this topic, is I think we forget that everybody experiences these types of feelings, fear, worry, anxiety, to varying degrees, and just talking about it and acknowledging how you deal with it, I think, is a very important part of recognizing that you're not alone, and that there are, everybody is dealing with these different things and can share their knowledge and what they've learned about how to get through different experiences.
So I agree. A big part of your presentation, and my biggest takeaway, was your ideas on the common thinking errors that we make as humans. How did you guys find out about these, come up with these, and are there any that resonated with you?
So I can speak a little bit to that. So just for background for our listeners, I chose from a list of about 10 common thinking errors to present on 4 that I think resonate with a lot of us in the workplace, those being underestimation, where we underestimate our capabilities to handle situations we're put in, the idea of black and white thinking, where you're always on one side of the spectrum. Things are either going to be wonderful, or if something goes wrong, it's absolutely you're not going to recover. The idea of catastrophizing, which is also along that same vein, just having a mistake happen and then not knowing that you're going to bounce back and really blowing it kind of out of proportion in your mind. And then the idea of unfair to compare, where you're looking at somebody else, where they're at in their career trajectory or their life, and looking at them and feeling inadequate, but not taking into account the idea of all the things that it took for them to get there and all the factors that play a role in where each of us are at in our lives. And so the idea of these thinking errors, I think what's interesting is that we're all aware of those thinking errors on some level, whether it's you know that you have a tendency to think a certain way. But I actually became kind of familiar and confronted with these ideas from going to therapy. And my therapist presented the ideas of just how we tend to lean towards a negative perspective on things in our lives. And we started to talk about, how that mentality impacts us through those different types of thinking errors, and then got to the point where we could address, and here's how you can change the way that you think and restructure and start to work through some of those patterns that you've really ingrained into your life.
2 of those really resonated with me. One is the blowing things out of proportion, which is something I struggle with in my career. and still do sometimes. And maybe for our listeners, maybe if you've been in a situation where something goes sideways at work, your boss gets upset with you, or a client doesn't like a deliverable, or there's something that goes wrong. And for some reason, you intuitively go to the worst case scenario. They think I'm dumb, they're going to fire me, instead of, well, I can fix this and I can build on it. So why do we do that? Why does the mind go there? And in my career, I've done that. And how often does the world explode? Never. The answer is never. And it's 99.9% of the time not nearly as bad as you build it up in your head. So being able to get ahead of that in the moment so you don't waste your life and you don't waste your time worrying about that is, I think, has been a challenge for me, and something that I think I've gotten better at as I've, matured. And, I'm 29 now, so I'm trying to, no, but so that's something that getting my arms around that has been a real growth, opportunity for me.
Going back to one thing that you said about, the idea of how often does the world explode. I started watching some TED Talks in preparation of this presentation, and one of them was on very specifically fear and the idea of, and this man's journey of how he confronted fear in his own life, and he started looking into stoicism and all these different practices, and he came across this quote that really helped him kind of reset his thinking. And it's the idea of, we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality, because the idea of you're building these scenarios in your mind when you've made a mistake, and you're playing out all the ways that it could continue to go wrong or spiral out of control. And most of the time that doesn't happen, but you put yourself through this emotional stress in your mind. And that's something that's really helped me in my personal and professional life, is just taking a step back and really evaluating it with that mindset. Okay, I made a spelling mistake in something. If I'm confronted with it, we'll go from there. I can fix this in a number of ways. And I think that's a really helpful mentality to keep in mind, just knowing that, if it hasn't happened yet, if this bad thing hasn't happened, chances are it might not.
It's not going to.
And if it does, I am a capable person who has the ability to correct the situation with all the skills that I've learned. So
I can really resonate with that, especially so when I first started, I was so stressed out that everyone here thought I hated me and thought I was doing terrible.
No.
And it was, I don't know why.
We love you.
I know. And there was no reason for that. It was just in my head. And it wasn't until I remember you said great work or good job on something that I had handed you. And it wasn't, which was so minuscule, but it changed my whole perception. I was like, oh, I did a good job. I'm doing a good job, at least with this. And I just hadn't gotten any positive. I just started. I didn't know what I was confused.
I'm sorry you felt that way.
No, and it's nothing. That's on me. It's just in my, being in my head.
It's those perceptions that you have about other people and how you're perceived by them, and you can very much, make that reality in your head. And
yes, I can relate to the catastrophe of it being everything, the end of the world, right? And so in my head, I had pinned it that I'm not doing a good job and it's the end of the world.
Well, and part of what you're talking about is virtuous, because so we have awesome clients, and they're smart, and they're fun, and they work for companies that are doing a lot of good in the world, but they're drivers. They want stuff done, which is why they need help sometimes. So the virtue of this is, I want to do a good job. I want the clients to like our work, and we want to, deliver. But you can't let that drive you to a lot of fear either.
And even going off of that, something that struck me near the end of our presentation was that I hadn't even realized was contributing to wanting to speak about this topic, but was my realization that starting out, this was my first full-time job. I had internships before this, but just knowing that, when you're a young junior staff member, everything feels like the stakes feel so high. And what I love about our company and the people who work here is that we are all so passionate about wanting to do a good job for ourselves, for our company, for each other, for our clients. And I just think that there's, that line where it's yes, we want to do a good job, but don't let that get you in a mindset that of where you're afraid to make mistakes or where you're afraid to be yourself. There's a balance between the two. And I think it's just important to find that for yourself. Because for me, it took some time where, I wanted to so passionately do such a great job here, and I let that get to a point where I was just terrified of making a mistake. And I think that inhibited me in a lot of situations, and it's been important for me personally to recognize that and kind of balance the good and the bad that plays into that mentality.
And sometimes the way I see that manifesting itself on a work scenario is what I call decision paralysis. I'm so afraid of making the wrong call that I won't make a call. Yeah, exactly. And at some point you have to make a decision, whether it's in your personal life or in your work life, and say, you know what, and all we can do is make the best decision we have based on the information in front of us, right? So we don't always have all the information. And at some point you have to make a decision and know that you have a good heart, that you're trying to do the right thing, and that you're surrounded by people who will understand if something goes wrong, and clients who will understand if you make the argument, here's why I made the decision. They'll be like, oh, okay, I understand why you made that decision. And 9 times out of 10 or 9.9 times out of 10, it's going to be the exact right decision, but make it.
So a lot of this whole presentation ended up with, could you kind of explain what you guys had us do after as the takeaway?
Oh, sure. So this, full credit to Tom for this. I thought this was really cool that he came up with this idea. So at the end of our presentation, which we walked through during the presentation, the thinking areas, some ways that you can kind of restructure your thinking and start to be more positive overall. But what we ended with was, the idea of, and I'll let Tom jump in too, if we could just see ourselves the way that other people see us, the way our coworkers see us, our family, our friends, a lot of the anxiety and the worry that we have would go away. And so I can let Tom explain the exercise that he had us all complete after this.
Well, so just riffing off of that. So, Grace, you see yourself a certain way. And there are things about yourself that you love, and you have insecurities and whatever. Same with Emma, and same with me. But if you saw you the way we saw you, you would run for president. Like, there would be nothing that would, or if you saw yourself the way I saw you and other people saw you, nothing would ever stand in your way. And so what we decided to do was we put everybody's name on a piece of paper and 4 or 5 blank lines, and we handed it out. And we asked everybody to write the nicest thing you can say about everybody on this team. And not, they're funny or they're great, but really think about, like, what is it about that person that enriches your life? And I asked everybody to handwrite it, because I think that there's something about putting pen to paper that, I don't know, manifests itself more than typing. So
it's more personal.
More personal, and maybe more of an emotional investment. Yeah, thank you. And so everybody did that, and we made a deadline. Most people made the deadline.
I did not.
to hand them all in. And we're going to type them up. So everybody's going to get a little booklet of what everybody said about you. We're not going to give everybody's stuff, but Emma's going to get what did everybody say. Yeah, she's going to get the Emma book about what are all the great things. And I hope that people read through them, but read through them with an open heart. Not like, yeah. But like, boy, this person, whoever wrote this, really feels that I, make their job easier, or, whatever it is. I don't want to give away what anybody's written, because I'm the one typing these up. But, and take it to heart. And I hope that they never throw it away. I hope that they keep it forever. And hopefully everybody stays here. But if you go on and, if people relocate or wherever you take that, you always have that as a reminder of how other people see you. And you haven't seen what people have written, but it's extraordinary.
I'm so excited.
It is extraordinary because, again, it's seeing yourself through the lens of others.
And it was emotional, I think, in a good way to write them for everybody, because I think for me especially, it really just compounded how deeply I appreciate all the people who work in this office and how we've really built a wonderful team, and it's been a blessing to be a part of and to continue to be a part of the work going on here. So
I agree. I'm super excited to get those.
Yes.
Is there anything else you wanted to add on culture, going back to that, or your presentation or anything?
I would just say, to pursue that knowledge and that information, because none of this is about fixing yourself, or the idea of, you're never going to eradicate everything in your life that you're afraid of, but it's about building your own skill set to cope with it in a more positive and a constructive way that really improves and enriches your own life. And I'm grateful for the resources that are available out there, and would just encourage, the knowledge and the searching for those.
I'm not going to follow that. That was a perfect wrap up. Maybe the only other thing I'd say is, for me, if I'm stressed out or if I feel myself being afraid, I think about, well, what do I have?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are things in my life that I have?
Yeah.
What am I grateful for? And this isn't anything new, but training yourself to default to that instead of the doomsday stuff is a real trick, and something that I think everybody should consider.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was a really great conversation.
Awesome.